keep it rolling. We got another a long list book to talk about. This one, I didn't actually mind. I was okay with this one, which is a dramatic shift from the rest of the long list for me so far, and that book is Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. This is probably going to be a quick review because I have very little to say about this book, as opposed to some of the other ones on the long list where I had a lot to say because there was a lot I was kind of taking away from it in a positive and a negative way. This one I have very little to take away. I wasn't left thinking about too much, but I had a more or less pleasant time reading it, and I can't say that it left me particularly annoyed. And I was more or less enjoying it. This book is about an unnamed main character, and she moves to take care of her brother as they live in some remote northern place where there's very little sort of inklings of civilization, and it's like a farm town area, and slowly she begins to think that the townspeople hate her, and it continues from there. So I think a lot of the plot synopses that I've read of this book are kind of deceptive. It doesn't really have a plot. It's not about anything. It's not about the things that are happening. What it's about is this kind of internal struggle of one woman to learn how to be obedient or how not to be, and she's kind of grappling with what obedience is, both in regards to obedience to a person, that being a man, obedience to a kind of natural order, and obedience to a kind of social expectation that she may have. I think the big thing that I liked about this book was the unreliability of the narrator, and I think that's where a lot of the humor, the kind of very subtle humor, comes into the book, because I thought this was actually quite a funny book. Which is not a praise I think the book is getting. I think it was quite deliberately funny at points, and that was because the narrator was so unreliable and because she was so nuts. There's a point near the beginning of the book where she's talking about how her old job threw her a farewell party, and she says something to the effect of, "They all fucking hated me, that's why they threw a party when I left." And I liked that sort of subversion of what that obviously meant. Like, they threw her a farewell party. You know, just from that as a premise, you don't immediately take any kind of inscrutable mean motive from that. But she says, "Well, they threw me a party because they hated me. Look, see, I'm leaving and they threw me a party. That means that they must hate me." It's the way, the conclusion she draws is where the unreliability comes from. Not necessarily from what happens to her and how she's the only one to see it, or her going mad or anything. It's more the conclusions that she decides to draw from occasions where you wouldn't necessarily think was a bad thing. She gives a really intense level of importance to herself and her own kind of place in the townspeople. She just assumes the second she gets there that everyone fucking hates her, and she's very paranoid. And I did find that quite sort of satirical and sort of funny, again, in a sly way, and I'm unsure if I meant to find it funny, but I think I am. I think that's what the author intended. One guy in the village asks for a favor from her, and she says, "His demands on me, previously involving the undertaking of specific tasks and labors, the fetching or taking away of various objects, had evolved to more subtle matters of the mind." Like, he just asked for a favor and you're turning it into this fucking Dostoevsky level mental battle. Like, come off it. But it's funny. I think it is funny. I think it's deliberate. I liked a kind of constant where the main character was determining people's motives through physicality, where she was like, "I understand the way he thinks because his shoulders are hunched," or "My brother is thinking this way of me because he has put the spoon down a certain way," or "he is muttering to himself." Something like that. Like, these are not necessarily things that happen, I'm just kind of pulling it out of my ass. But I mean that the way that she's determining how people think about her is not necessarily based in any kind of real reality that someone with a different sense of social cue would see it as. The main character kind of reminded me of the chief in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Her main goal as a character in like, until the end, her main kind of goal is to become meek and to make herself seem unimportant, and you can take a feminist slant from that. But the idea is that she's looking to not draw attention to herself. And the idea of the book is that in trying, like, she's trying not to draw attention to herself, but the world has just decided that attention will be put on her. Strange things are happening and the villagers turn their eyes towards her. And I like that the book deals with that as something that's kind of like fate, like she is doomed to have attention drawn on herself, which is something she doesn't want. And again, I found that quite funny, but that it was a very sort of deft way of doing it, of going, alright, well, she's trying to make herself seem meek and servile to her brother, and she's trying to seem normal and in touch with nature. That's a big theme, is that she's trying to make herself seem seem quiet and in tune with nature, but nature seems to fight back against that, and any kind of social order seems to fight back against that, and that's where the conflict of the book comes from. And she's not doing anything to draw attention to herself, and that's why it's funny. There's a couple of deliberate jokes that make me think it is all intentional. Here's one. There's she's talking about a corrupt lawyer in the business she works at, and she mentions that he's responsible for poisoning estuaries and sending people to jail, and he's a very bad person who's had a lot of knock-on effect. And then she says that he hoped at least, he said in an undertone, to have his ankle monitor removed in the coming days, as it had been causing an allergic reaction that was both painful to experience and unpleasant to look at. And that's a very sort of lightly funny joke about how, you know, obviously that's a lesser evil that he's having to experience than what he's inflicted on other people. So it's a very, again, deft, light humor that makes me think that the whole book is intentionally funny, which is how I took it. There's a scene where she's signing up to a community roster, and it's playing out like a fucking thriller where she's watching someone else in the corner who's looking at her, and she's like, fuck, is he about to, like, come over to me and talk to me? Oh god. And again, it's funny, like, because she's just signing up for a roster. Like, if I was just in any normal community that I did that, someone would look at me and I'd smile back at them, and they'd probably smile back at me, and I would not think any more about it. Again, the idea is that this woman, her paranoia and her kind of intense feelings of needing to be meek and not needing to be seen stretch into the way that she draws conclusions in a way that someone like perhaps me or someone else that I know wouldn't draw conclusions from any of these social events. Because you'd be in this event where you're signing up for a roster and someone looks at you and you wouldn't think, fuck, this whole town hates me, I'm gonna die. Like, that's not where you go. I also thought the writing was really strong. I loved some of the uses of repetition. I actually really like the structural density of it, where it's just big paragraphs. I found that because the book was so short, I had no problem investing myself into actually reading it properly and like really paying attention to it as I read it. And I got a lot out of it in that way. I didn't feel like the writing was particularly hard to read. It wasn't like my eyes were unfocusing. I didn't feel like it was wasting my time or it was an exertion, really. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good read. Here's a quote. I saw the grass grow. I saw it growing. I saw the green changing. Noticed the new heights reached by the branches. I paid such close attention. I just really love the phrase repetition there and the way that it moves between focus. Yeah, I think it's a very well-written book. I just personally, my main issue with it is that I'm not left taking a whole lot from it, really. I like thinking about the unreliability of the narrator, and that's about it. I'm not left thinking about any kind... It hasn't left me with my worldview shaken about social order or the way things work. I was not left thinking so much, and as much as I liked the writing, I can't say it was particularly jaw-dropping or incredible to me, but it didn't openly offend me or annoy me or bore me like some of the other books on the long list so far. I think the main complaint I see from people is that this woman never shuts the fuck up about her emotional detail and her kind of feelings. She talks about her feelings a lot, and it is repetitive, but I didn't feel like it was long enough to where I wasted my time, and I also felt like the repetition was at least part of it. And I felt like, as an author, she did a good job entering the headspace of this paranoid, intensely driven woman. She has one goal, which is to not be seen, and she's really going out of her way to try and get that. And then at the end, of course, she's forced to do that. At points, the wordiness of it did keep my kind of engagement of it at bay, but only occasionally. I can't say it was all the time, but there were points where I read a passage, and then I reread it, and I went, you could have said that so much simpler. Why did you write it like that? Soon we would no longer need to withdraw to the desert for a space of contemplation and self-abnegation. Soon personal ascesis would arrive in the form of one more letter, one more mass mortality event, one more migration stopped by total annihilation. I wanted to be good in the terrible world. I thought of the birds. I accumulated fidelities in the space of diminishing returns. Like, a lot of that didn't make a lot of sense to me, and as I reread it, it still doesn't make sense, and I think it is just deliberately wordy. But I feel like the character is meant to be deliberately wordy and pretentious like that. It's just a vibe I get, so maybe that's the point. But yeah, I feel like it was too wordy, and I was left kind of like, what the fuck did she say there? But it didn't happen all the time, I will say. It was only occasionally. Interlinking public perception with, like, madness and a woman's role in the world relative to a dominant male figure. You could say a husband, in this case it's her brother. That I liked the linking between those, and I thought the ending was pretty good. I like the final line where she says, "I claim my right to live," and that comes immediately after a moment of total, should we say, social humiliation. She's made to get up and stand on the pulpit in front of the entire village in this weird kind of ritual that she's been put in front of, where she's touching some piglets or some shit, I don't really remember. But, I liked the idea that immediately following that, where she's faced kind of with her worst fear as it is, she decides to claim her right to live, and her right to live comes alongside her caring for her brother who is deathly ill now all of a sudden. It's a weird book, and it's definitely about a woman who goes mad philosophically. And I like that. I like the premise of the book, but again, I'm not left thinking too much about it. It's very inscrutable, it's quite sort of in its own head. And I'm not left thinking about applying it to my own life. There was a moment where the main character said something where it seemed like they'd become aware of the lens they were viewing the world through, and I never like that, where characters become self-aware. I don't like that. Was not the antagonism I had long imagined, merely rather a projection of my own inflated sense of self-importance. Like, you didn't have to say that. I didn't want the character to say that. I wanted that to be something I drew from it. So yeah, I didn't like that. I feel like the author, for the most part, did a great job with the writing. I enjoyed the spontaneity of it. It felt like she had written it in a very spontaneous place. I love some of the flow of it. I love some of the rhythm of it. Yeah, it's a weird-ass little book. I think the title of the book gives some clue as to what it's about. It's not about a character studying obedience. The book is itself a study of what obedience is and how obedience fits into certain orders. And I like it. I thought it was a good book. I feel comfortable just giving it a pretty solid 6 out of 10. Yeah, in my mind, I equate this book to Boulder. I'm not going to be comparing every Booker long-listed book to books on the International Booker long list. I'm only doing that this year because I read them this year. Next year I won't be doing that shit anymore. But in comparison to books from the long list, I liked this as much as I liked Boulder. So there you go. I thought it was a pretty good book. I will be predicting it for the shortlist when I get around to doing a predictions video. I will be putting it on my list there. So we'll see. But I think a jury would like it. But until that point, thanks for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this book as well. It doesn't seem like one people are particularly digging, which is a shame, but I enjoyed it. So there you go. Cheers guys, have a good one. I'll read, I'll read This Other Eden next. I was gonna read How to Build a Boat, but I can't be fucked to read that, so we're gonna do This Other Eden next. So stay tuned for reviews. Thanks guys, goodbye!